I'll introduce the rest of the panel when they come up. So the format's going to be is Dean DeByes, who we've already introduced earlier and co-host with Rob for this session, is going to spend about 15 minutes talking to us, and he's going to give us kind of an elephant and mice thing. So I won't go too much into the elephant, but think about, are you an elephant or a mouse when he's walking through? I've already identified what I have been in past lives. So Dean, lead us off, please.
Okay, thank you. How's everybody doing? Good. Isn't this a fun place? Yeah. I think when we go on the tour, which over lunch you'll really start to get the sense of it all. So I thought I would just show you some slides from a large keynote that I usually do. It takes about an hour and 20 minutes, so I'm just going to take one module out of it. So I'm not going to cover everything on purpose. My background, for those that don't know, I've both been in large corporations that were doing startups, like FedEx, which was one of the biggest startups way back when, and doing turnarounds for large corporations, as well as when I moved out to Silicon Valley, running startups and taking them to the next level. So I typically come in after the founder, take it to the next level, either take it public or take it to an exit. And then I also have a couple groups. One's called Startup Partners. So we help startups, the VCs, the boards, the CEOs, kind of unnaturally scale their companies faster. As you can guess, one of the ways, is to partner with major multinational corporations. And then Reboot Partners, which is a word I use a lot. It really helps multinational corporations kind of accelerate their growth where they tend to be stalling. So I've got some pretty severe opinions about that, having worked in big companies. So if I feel like I'm making fun of you, I'm not. It just comes from the horrible experience of having done both before. So now I find myself either running companies or at the same time helping other companies figure out some secrets. And most of the things I'm going to show you today is just to give a framework of the discussion up here, but it's also just what I've learned over the years and mistakes and successes and failures. And my biggest issue with corporations today is at a certain level we get big, we get fat, and we get slow. Some people say we get stupid, then I changed it to slow one day because it just stupid was not a very friendly word. And most people go, all right, Dean, for God's sakes, we know that, we're too big, we're in countries I've never heard of, and I say that's fine, but the problem is the connective tissue between big, fat, and slow is what's lurking is irrelevance, obscurity, decline of your brand, of your company, of your product, of you even working at the company. And that's what most people don't freak out enough about. They're just like, hey, we're big, fat, and slow, don't worry about it. So this is what I try to attack with Reboot and some of the friends that I work with here in the room and helping other companies, or quite frankly, just helping myself turn around a company. And the reason just think about a few companies that are on the brink of irrelevance, obscurity, and decline. BlackBerry, Nokia. Think about ones that already passed the brink. Blockbuster. Anyone else? Circuit City. I have a slide on Kodak. I met with their board of directors this week. Ex-board of directors, sorry. So we'll touch on that too. So when I'm not running companies full-time, I kind of help CEOs occasionally, and they say, hey, how do you do it? And they always want to know how. How do you bring these companies back from the brink of decline? And my first cute answer is, in kind of a cute Rob Wolcott way, I say, well, it's really not about how, it's when. Is you have to do it before it's too late, before you kind of are in a turnaround situation. You've got to operate as if you're in a turnaround. They look at me and go, I'm not in a turnaround. I'm Walmart, I'm fine. I say, okay, well, act as if you're under attack, because you are under attack and business is under attack, and try to approach it very differently. So I basically have about 30 things that I've tried and done at different companies, and most of them work. So today I just thought I'd talk about two. So the two that I like the most and that are relative to this crowd are, and of course I'm calling it a dance move only to keep it with the cute theme that Rob and I came up with, is how do you do innovation inside? So they want to keep the innovation inside, which is not my preference. So the ways that we do that is we kind of blend the best things that come from startups and the best things that turnaround experts do, and we blend them together. It's not easy to do. You need the right people to do that. And then we focus in on the reboot zones. And the three that I love the best are people, platform, and passion. And today we can only talk about platform in a little sliver, but as you can guess, it has a lot to do with people if you're going to reboot from the inside. So we're going to touch on that a little bit. My favorite is actually, as you guys know, more innovation outside. So how do you bring these big, fat, slow corporations together with startups? They don't have to be startups. A lot of them are just emerging growth companies that just happen to be more nimble, further ahead, have a new product you've never heard of. How do we bring them together to accelerate growth? So the Latin term innovation dance, as you can see, is to renew, change, jump, leap, whatever it is. But what I found in going out and working with people, and I've found my own bias is startups are really comfortable kind of working with other startups. So they're kind of like really good at dancing with themselves. And you guys, the multinationals, well, you're pretty comfortable kind of partying with, your peers and not necessarily hanging out with those little, mice guys. So what do? You go out and you hire these, consultants in the room. You hire these innovation process consultants to kind of teach you how to do the innovation dance. You even hire creativity consultants to help you kind of get in the mood and do the whiteboarding and spend way too much money on this stuff. And my thought is, God, if we just took a quarter of that money and spent it on you guys partnering with startups, it would be kind of cool. And the cool thing is you actually don't need that money, as you just heard from BP. And if you think I've taken this elephant thing too far, do you guys remember the Accenture ad campaign? It was very successful, and they were making fun of their own clients. They got a lot of phone calls on this. I'm not sure why. So here's the view from a startup. He's like, hey, I don't know if I want to dance with you. You're too big, you're too fat, you're too slow, but that's not what bothers me is I'm kind of a nimble little guy, and you might forget about me, you might squash me, you might just waste a lot of my time. And you really like process, and I hate process. So you can tell from Kevin up here this morning, he hates process. Process slows things down. So the view from the startup is very scary. But the view from the multinational is just the opposite. It's like, oh my God, you guys are too nimble, you're too quick, and quite frankly, you're very disorganized. I don't really want to work with you. So trying to match these two together, I have found is a very difficult thing. And it really comes down to culture and the people. It's like, do you two really want to get along? You're in a startup. He's in a major university, which happens to be a corporation, a public corporation. Can these two really get along and get a partnership going? And how long will it have to survive, which is something I'll talk about in a minute. So this is where we want to get to, is we want that dichotomy, that rich diversity, and not necessarily being on the same page. So we've talked about that the last day. We don't need to cover it again. But what I find when the magic sets in is when you're really putting your heads together to solve core problems that are very important to you. So what's next? There's two things that I usually like to focus in on. One is very basic. So Peter, in the back of the room, your marketing textbooks always go back to kind of the core. So I call them kind of reboot zones. What are most people comfortable with? So I first identify the what. By the way, most people skip this step. They just go right to the how are we going to partner? This is so great. It's exciting. Some of you are going to walk out after the tour. You're going to be like, this is so great. It's exciting. I want to partner with you. So I always recommend you come back to what is it that we're trying to do. And most innovation, as Rob and everyone in the room will tell you, kind of happens down in my reboot one zone here. Current products, current markets, very what I call incrementalist innovation. And that's okay. Most innovation's done there. It's not that exciting. I try to focus on two areas myself when looking at a reboot. One is how do you get up into the expander section? So you're going into new markets with your current products. Not very exciting. You don't really need a startup for that. The third one is how do you take the new products into current markets? You've already got a major base, and this is where most of it happens, partnering with startups. I know this is basic. You'd be surprised how many times, even myself, I go right to this quadrant because I'm a disruptor. I want to go right to that quadrant, which is the most risky, and the reason it's in red is most major corporations don't want to deal with it. It's too frightening. Guess what? This is where startups play, and it's why they're a good partner. So that's phase one. Phase two is how are we going to do it? So you guys know my preference is innovation outside. Why? So I just came from the National Association of Corporate Directors, our annual convention. And on a panel, we were talking with two of the ex-Kodak directors about what happened. Why didn't they go out and innovate better? Why didn't they come to places like 1871? And this goes back years, and try to reinvent themselves. And when they missed the hardware window and said, we're not going to make it in digital cameras, why did they just give up? Why didn't they say, well, we should be involved in lifestyles, photos, and things like that? And if they had had that perspective, and if they'd been out in Silicon Valley, we probably would have told them, maybe you should buy Pinterest, or maybe you should buy many of these other photo companies. What's the one that Facebook bought? Instagram. They could have done all types of cool partnerships. Gave up too early. So let's get into the how. There's probably 20 ways about how you can do it, whether you're looking for technology like BP to embed in your current products, or doing something more disruptive in terms of the market. So I usually look at two things. I said, do you want control or do you want to let go? Do you want to be centralized or do you want to be more distributed? And not everything fits in these nice, tidy boxes, but Rob likes it when I draw a box, so I drew one. So first one, embed. So how can you take entrepreneurial type people, and embed them in your organization. And just use that as a way to get innovation going. Done that a lot. It works. You really need to protect those people because it doesn't always last long. Second one is separate. How do you separate a new venture from the mothership? That one's very popular. I've done it. Many of you in the room have done it. The third one, my most favorite, it's still a bit centralized because you're controlling the partnership with a startup, but how do you just go out and partner with startups? It's called giving them an order. It's called embedding their technology. It's called just getting to know them. It's not necessarily called buying them, which is what most of us jump to, whether it's Cisco or Google or Motorola. And the last one is investing. You know, what's the right time to invest in startups? So many other ways to do it. These are just the 4 that I like, and I thought I'd show you examples of each one before we go to the panel and tell you some stories. So on embedding, 2 companies that I think have done this well. Many companies do this well, but they don't do it very long. There's some that actually fund it over and over and over again, where you just allow certain of your employees to do whatever they want. They get a certain amount of time where they can just go out and invent stuff. They can go look at weird industries that have nothing to do with your industry, but there's no real structured program around it. I don't recommend this for everyone. Usually what happens on this one is they focus on 2 things. The R1 quadrant, which is incrementalist innovation, which is fine. But at least they have the freedom to be entrepreneurial. And they also do the product extension ones. They don't necessarily go off and create new markets in Asia and things like that. So this is almost like a part-time job for people. Some companies are now figuring out, how do I take that, where a Google or a 3M or a Cisco or many other companies are doing this, rather than giving people 10% of their time, I say, you are a talent scout, you are a technology scout. So we heard about that yesterday. I'm going to give you 50% of your time to go to Russia and talk to some of these scientists and see what we can develop. So that's embedding. It's got some pitfalls. If you're the boss and you've got some people here, your job is to serve and protect, just like the police. Because when the quarter goes bad or there's a major fire, these are the first people to either quit because they've had it, or they get fired because they're like not contributing, quote unquote, because they've got a different long-term outlook. So just when you get into that kind of a situation, you really have to think about, does the CEO support it? Do I support it? And do I have enough people doing it? Or is it just kind of a nice thing on a brochure? So getting a little more interesting, I like to separate things from the mothership. So just like Finn in Norway, as a newspaper, I think almost, 10 years ago it was, we had the vision to say, we're going to screw this up, we're going to get a separate CEO, put this in a separate building, and let them start up a new classifieds online service. Smartest thing they could have ever done. I actually did one of these when I moved to Silicon Valley. I took over a company called the Imagination Network, which was owned by AT&T. They just bought out all the stock. And they loved it. Everything was great. And about a year and a half later, somebody woke up and went, what the hell do we own this company for? So what happens in this occasionally, Peter will vouch to this, is many corporations wake up one day and go, get rid of this thing, I don't want it anymore. So sometimes if you're the CEO or you're embedded in one of these companies that is quote unquote away from the mothership, it needs to be away but protected. And then you need to figure out a strategy that if they ever don't want you, what are you going to do? So we were lucky where I said, listen, we're not going to give up that easy. We're on our way to a $100 million company. We were an online games company. It was a very hot space. We were actually the largest at the time. Shows you how old I am. This was in the 90s. And we essentially went out and shopped it, and we had bids from Sony, Microsoft, and AOL, sold it to AOL, and it became their games space, which was very, very successful for them. So this is interesting. What you're seeing in this space is, I'm going to pick on AT&T a lot in this presentation just because I've worked with them, is you're seeing people go from this structured core lab to more of a disintermediated thing where they say, hey, let's separate this from the mothership. But in this case, AT&T has actually said, let's take part of Bell Labs and set up centers around the world. I don't know if Texas and Silicon Valley and Israel is actually around the world, but they have 3 centers similar to this. And they essentially, different startups can come in and work with them and help them. So I give it about a B-, which is good. I usually give tough grades on these. But it's interesting, this one focuses on R3. What does that mean? They're just doing like product extensions for mobile. And that's great. Because one of the things that most groups don't have is they don't have a very focused vision. It's like, hey, Dean, go start this incubator and let's just do stuff. It's like, no. This is very focused. So we'll see how the report card comes out on this one. And we'll come back to Bell Labs in a second. Now, wouldn't you guess, AT&T has a process. Once you walk in the door, they show you this poster and go, aha, Well, we're kind of independent, but we have this process. So at first, you walk in, you make fun of this. You say, yeah, you are AT&T. Aha, you're too structured. I actually like this. Because what they say is we can develop things 3 times faster. Having worked with them, it's actually 30 times faster. So it's okay to have a little bit of a structure, a little bit of a process, a little bit of a focus. And some of you, when we get into the panel, can bring up other groups that are doing this. I'm not saying everyone should have an incubator or have something where startups can just wander in, but it's a nice way for AT&T to get the best minds in Silicon Valley to help them with apps that they normally would just probably not even think of themselves. Is this mine? Yes. So another way to do it is partner with startups. I like this one because it gives a major corporation the ability to do something extremely disruptive. So this is way up in the top right corner, right? So I did this a long time ago. One of my corporate jobs after I left FedEx was here at Annixter up in Skokie, or wherever they are now. And I was tasked with doing startups inside a major corporation. That's really kind of how I got into this thing. So, but I was a startup. I had 1 employee, or 2, I'm sorry, I was one of them. And we did 4 startups. They all were fairly successful. One of them really took off, and it's because we did some interesting partnerships. So 3 of them we launched with partnerships through major corporations. So in this case, I'm the startup. I'm not the major corporation guy. So while we were in the cable TV industry, real quick story, and at that time everything was coax from the head end all the way to your TV set. There was no fiber optic in the middle like there is now, and it was because no one had invented lasers to do that. We said this would be a really cool thing. Again, back to the first box. What is it we're trying to do? We're trying to disrupt the industry. We're a little distributor, and there's 2 companies that we really want to irritate. I'm the mouse. I want to irritate General Instruments, which is now Motorola, and Scientific Atlanta, which is now Cisco. And we're this sleepy little distributor that sells all their products. So we said it would be nice for us to be a manufacturer. Very naive thinking, by the way. But remember what we said yesterday. Don't let your reality brain kind of hold back your ideas. So we said, we have no technology. We have no idea what we're doing. We're a bunch of sales guys distributing products to every cable and system in the world, which means we had great relationships. So we went to the Death Star and partnered with AT&T. So remember these guys? This is a picture of the exact labs in Murray Hill, New Jersey, and there was 2 other ones in New Jersey, where we actually got very lucky to get access. We had friends of friends, and we literally would wander around the labs with visitor badges, of course. We weren't spies, trying to come up with new technology. And everywhere we went, for you telco guys in the room, AT&T in the 80s had moved on to digital for all their digital products. And there was no analog lasers to transmit cable television signals. Until one day I was finally meeting with one of the higher ups who was like, yeah, you guys are really irritating, but you know so-and-so, so we're going to help you. So there is one guy down in the lab that's working on some analog lasers. We don't know why. And this AT&T at the time had 3,000 PhDs in these 2 facilities, some of the best scientists in the world. And essentially, we got with them, developed a new laser, not only developed it, but took it to market, launched it with all the cable operators, brought all these customers to AT&T headquarters, had Arnold Penzias actually present to them about the Big Bang Theory book he just wrote. So sometimes the partnership, you think it's a technology partnership, this was seize the market partnership, flank the competitors, and literally piss off the industry. So we created a new category, and that launched Annixter into a whole new company. We spun off Antec and took it public, and for you cable guys in the room, I thought you'd like that story. 2 other things you can do in Dancing with Partners. You're going to go see some of them now. So we'd love you guys to get a relationship with 1871. There's many other ones around the world. Just to be fair, Kevin and I know that. We're actually collaborating with some of those as well. There's many accelerators in the towns where you live in. There's other groups. Everybody asks me, can we do this with government? So Rob knows there's another group I'm involved in called the Security Innovation Network. We take government, startups, VCs, and major corporations like Lockheed Martin and Boeing, and we actually help them solve cybersecurity problems. Nobody can keep up with the hacking, so we put them in touch with startups, and literally these startups get funded and partnered with by the government with your tax money. I think they've invested a couple $100 million already in these startups.
Robert and Simon, Robert Rodriguez, we're partnering for T-Mobile next year.
That's right. And I'm on my way when I leave here to our annual conference, which is in the National Press Club, where these startups all come in and present. We've vetted 200 down to 20, and then we have one in Silicon Valley every spring. So don't think this is just cool little digital media companies. This can be wet science, heavy stuff, as well as solving the biggest problems in our infrastructure. Other companies are more structured. Citrix, they have a lot of money. I know the CEO, he's set up his own incubator. So he's got his own little stash of companies working on very disruptive technology in the IT space. Some of these will fail, but he's got a good handle on a lot of them. Another one that you guys wouldn't think of, so Cisco, Google, they buy a lot of companies. I was running a company called TNS Media that we sold to WPP. And what I noticed about WPP is they took any money that you make, they really are putting into innovation outside. And they would say, we're going to invest in companies where we can expand geographically and expand like in digital agencies, like one of the ones you saw yesterday. Would actually go out and buy a little digital agency. And most people say you're crazy. You're going to invest and then eventually buy them at an inflated value. But this is their growth strategy. People inside the company don't notice that it's actually keeping them from doing their own thing. But let's just give you an idea. In the first 3 quarters of this year, this is what WPP has bought. Literally every transaction, every bit of growth from this huge public company, one of the largest ad agencies on the planet, literally this is how their growth strategy is. And it works well for them. For other companies, this would never work. You can only buy so many companies till your employees start leaving. So Cisco and Google are good at it, but they do it in a much different way. They're working on R3s and R4s, really hard problems that nobody solves. So that's it, just to tee us up. So just 2 things you should think about: the what, and then more importantly, go right to the how. But don't forget the what. And figure out, the biggest question I always get is, can I do all these at once? And in the companies in this room, some of you should be doing all 4 of them at once. Not necessarily working for the same guy. You've got to kind of sprinkle out your risk. But my feeling is you bring it all together, you figure out what's your culture, what's the right culture out there, what are the right startups to partner with, and try to come up with ones where you put your 2 and 2 together, you really get something disruptive and exciting. So that's it. That's how I kick off the panel with that. And
Dean,
take it away.
Thank you very much. So I think Dean's given us some valuable framing in how to think about the world of startups and big corporations and rebooting. So what I'd like to do is invite the other panelists up. So come on up. So Gail Fugate, who's coming on up, she is the just retired VP of Consumer Insights at General Mills and has done a lot of work recently in working with startup digital media companies and applying them. And she's probably one of the smartest, deepest thinking person around consumer insights that I know, and was a direct report to the CEO. And Daru, come on up, yeah. And then Carter Cast, you know Dean and Daru, of course. And Carter Cast is joining us. Toby Redshaw was originally on the agenda, but he is sick as a dog, which is unusual, for 3 days in bed. So Carter is one of what we call it, pull-off-the-shelf panelist, not really. So Carter brings a valuable experience as well. He was the CEO of Walmart.com. So did a startup inside a massive corporation, and he was the guy that actually got it to work. Was the founding CMO at Blue Nile, and is now a professor at Kellogg School. So I think this panel is really going to give us some tremendous valuable insights. So I'm going to pose them a question. I'll share a story before I ask them each to respond. And the question is to share, from their experiences, could they share a memorable dance and a not so memorable dance that they've been through, and share some of the insights and lessons that both corporates and entrepreneurs should take away from their experience. So my story on that is I was running a $250 million software business out in Denver. It was a specialized ERP system, and we went to partner with IBM to become their sole validated ERP system in the transportation vertical. And we were very excited because this was going to blow out an emerging business for us. So they flew out actually to Denver to meet, and myself, my head of marketing, head of sales, walk into a room, and there are 8 IBM people sitting around the table. And they said, oh, we need to dial up because there's 3 people that couldn't make it. So there's 11 people. I'm going, oh my God. So as we went through the meeting, I and my people, we were not feeling the love because these guys were more interested in process and not our partnership. Okay? And they weren't feeling the commitment because there was only 3 of us in the room. And so we were like miles away from each other. Okay? So my lesson there when you get into kind of those dances is you've got to have a very frank and open dialogue from day one about not so much, oh, this is what the partnership's going to do, but it's how you're going to get to the partnership. And you say, I've only got these people, I've only got this time. And they're going to say, well, I've got this big laborious process that takes 6 months and I have 20 people that specialize in it. Bridge that gap from day one. That's my story that I'd like to share. So I'll start off with Carter. So would you like to say, pass the ball to you?
Take me off the shelf and then you throw me the first question.
And some water.
What am I, Tang?
So Carter, would you like to just share with us some of your memorable dances and not so memorable dances and some lessons?
Yeah, thanks, Peter. I think the hardest dance I had was joining Walmart.com. It was a separate business invested in by Excel, by Jim Breyer of Facebook fame. The Walmart had a controlling interest, Excel had a certain percent, and the management team had a certain percent. So basically, they hired a bunch of people in Silicon Valley to become part of a ragtag team. So we weren't really Walmart-esque. We hadn't really bought into the Walmart culture. We were a bunch of entrepreneurs who, and I was at Blue Nile at the time when Jim recruited me. So you had about 30 of us. And our job was to build the platform, to rebuild the platform from Silicon Valley and integrate into the work in Bentonville. So we successfully got the business to about $1 billion, $1.5 billion, with a lot of work and a lot of tough times coming to understand the culture. But this particular dance was the integration dance. And it was, these are not the droids you're looking for dance. As you guys remember, if you saw Star Wars, Alec Guinness was pulled over with Obi-Wan, R2-D2, and C-3PO. And the stormtroopers were looking for the C-3PO, or R2-D2 had some encrypted information on the Death Star that the Emperor wanted to get a hold of. So the Emperor's stormtroopers see these two droids, and Alex Guinness looks at the stormtrooper and says, "These are not the droids you're looking for." And then the stormtrooper looks at the other stormtrooper and says, "These are not the droids we're looking for." They zoom on. So somewhere along the lines, I would often do this dance where I would be asked to come to Walmart and speak about the future of the internet and how we were going to take advantage of it. And I had a stack of presentations in my back credenza that were probably taller than Yao Ming. And I'd pull presentation number 22, and I'd hop on a plane and I'd go to Bentonville. And I'd present Peggy, who's a 35-year-old housewife. Here's how she shops now in 2005. She's a loyal Walmart customer. Here's the purchasing cycle she goes through. And then I'd fast forward to 2012. And I'd say, given the open brand, open meaning on demand, personalized, engaged and entertained, and networked, if you take that acronym, let's look at how she shops in 2012. And I'm giving this presentation in 2005. So I created this scenario to scare the hell out of everybody on how she's going to use the internet, disintermediate stores, price comparison shop, expect cross-channel capabilities, mobile, untethered access, you name it. And I'd look, as I worked on this, I would look around and I'd see some worried look. I'd see some people doing a sort of a, But generally, I would see people looking at their notes and thinking, oh, good, we have a planogram meeting after this to discuss changing the adjacencies on the 192,000 square foot super centers. And I realized when I go to that meeting that what had happened was Alex Guinness had whispered to these executives, "These are not the droids you're looking for." So that was my hard dance, and it happened over and over and over again when we were in the stage that Dean was talking about where we had to integrate. When we were separate and we got up and got running fast, built the platform, did a lot of online marketing, assorted the product, built the logistics network, we were okay. When we had to integrate with their item file, integrate with their technologies, make sure we integrated our merchandising strategies, do better cross-channel marketing, it's very, very hard.
I think a lot of people can relate to that. So Gail.
I call that the brain damage phase.
Brain damage, yeah.
It's brain damage.
It's serious brain damage.
So I'm going to tell a little bit of my story, and then I'm going to offer you a few tips on Mind the Gap, which are what I see as the gaps between the corporation and the startup. So my story is in 1998. I was appointed the vice president of, I got to name it, Consumer Insights. It was redefining market research to consumer insights. You all think about it as being about the consumer, how we interact with the consumer over the years has changed a lot. So in those days, what we were doing is literally brown paper bags with 2 boxes of brownie mix at the door to door, right? That was a big way to contact consumers. And we had telephone, and we had mall intercept. So you think about, you get the phone call at night, 6 o'clock at night, or you get stopped by the clipboard. Anybody ever walk around the mall and you like take the cut over to the other side quick because you see them coming? Not that effective, not very consumer friendly. So there's the internet. Our CEO said, we need an internet strategy. All my friends were like, you better do it because we don't know how we're going to do it. And so I set about to say, well, how am I going to come up with a way to operationalize this really consumer friendly, so better way to interact with consumers? Because they're already on the internet. And so I looked out at my group, and at that point in time, I had a phone room. And I had a lot of people that were spread throughout the divisions, and I kind of was like, all right, I don't think the phone room is going to actually get me to the internet. So I went out and I looked for a partner. So we found Market Tools, who was a partner, and it's similar to the Walmart dance, because Market Tools was, yes, they were out in California, and our executives were like, okay, this is one of those California companies, right? One of those .com companies, so naturally we want to invest in them. Unfortunately, I had to say yes, and then they're like, where are they located exactly? And then I had to say Sausalito. So, and they wore black T-shirts, and they had sunglasses on leashes, and they fulfilled all the promises on that front. As I looked at Mind the Gap, the gaps were, that first gap is, all right, choose your partners. I mean, who is your partner going to be? And in my company, I would offer to you, find the money, don't just find the highest ranking person. I would have probably been at that point in time the last person that you would think would bring a .com into General Mills and place both a venture investment, start a joint venture, and then help turn that company ultimately from a $1 million, $3 million company to a $100 million company that was ultimately sold to SurveyMonkey, and the whole package was valued at $1 billion. And I had, though, a partner that was the treasurer of General Mills, and the treasurer was actually the banker. So there were different sources of money. I was doing market research, so I actually was able to be a customer, but we also had a banker. And so we worked on it together. And this is really important because the second gap to mine is the language gap. So the language at General Mills is GBS, CRS, IST, right? It's all the corporations. It's all acronyms. The language, though, of the VC world is mezzanine round, valuation, exit, completely different language than we were used to. Warrants, my story on the language gap revolves around warrants, because I went to my boss, who was the vice chairman at the time, and he said, okay, Gail, what's a warrant? And I said, well, basically, it's a stock option. And he said, Gail, I want you to get a finance adult in here, and I want you to have him come and tell me what a warrant is, and don't come back until you do that, right? So I went and I got my friend, the treasurer, and he came in, and he sat down, and this is a true story. You can't make this stuff up. And he sat down, and my treasurer friend, Dave, said, Steve says, okay, Dave, what's a warrant? And Dave says, well, basically, Steve, it's a stock option. And he said, thank you, that is so helpful. I understand it perfectly now. So the third gap I would offer you is the business model gap, right? Because at that point in time, and subsequently when we did social media, invest in social media companies, we did experiments with about 40 of them, and I just sorted out 80 mobile companies, global mobile companies. At that point in time, what technology companies are doing, and I still see this today, is they basically do, if you build it, they will come. Right? So they say, we can do anything you want. And that's what Market Tools was saying. It's an ASP. So they say, okay, we can do anything you want. The problem is anything you want doesn't turn into anything. And so it has to be somehow kind of productized. So that, I think, is a really important kind of business model gap. I would say that they're also kind of close by saying there's a valuation gap, which is figure out what you're going to bring and what you're going to get, and it's not just a money exchange. Because there's a really different culture in a startup that corporations are all trying to figure out how to integrate into their organizations. That's really different than just give us the money and kind of go away. And then finally, I would say there's a destination gap. Because when you're investing in a company, a lot of times the destination is it going to be the exit? Is it going to be the day that you have the closing dinner? And so I've kind of found it enjoyable to hear the stories about timing in corporations, because I'm not sure, I do think corporations are slow, and my VC friends say the arteries are clogged. But actually, I think the difference is that corporate timing, it's really predictable. On Monday mornings, you get your sheet, and you know exactly where you stand, and you figure out if you're going to go down to the cafeteria so you see your boss at lunch or not. And so in corporate timing, what we did is 3 weeks before the close of the deal, I sent out engraved invitations to the closing dinner. Because in a corporation, if you're going to close on that date, then that would happen, right? And that's ridiculous. But there's, you know, that is just that's a gap. That's kind of a destination gap. And the close was actually the beginning. It wasn't the end. And so that's kind of those are my gaps.
Gail, thanks very much. So I think, you know, we've had 4 great panels. I get hope because we're seeing examples of things working in big corporations, you know, with startups and successful dancers. So I'd like to open up questions to everyone. So great opportunity, guys. Let's go. Any questions? Wow. So everybody thinks we've got it nailed. Seriously? Okay. Yeah. So
my question is, and you know, Robert poses a question to his classes to ask, you know, so if the CEO comes to you and says, here, you can drive innovation, here's a budget, make it happen, and I'm charged with that, but I don't have the budget, and you're coming in and you're trying to enact change in a big corporation that often is designed to protect itself. So I feel like, you know, a virus coming in and there's antibodies, right, fighting me off, for protecting their ways of life. And you're trying to get them to do new things in new ways. I mean, how do you do that, right? If you're focused on short-term wins and you're rewarded for doing more of what you've always done, but the corporate strategy wants you to do new things in new ways, how do you enact that change within that type of ecosystem?
yeah. Ricardo, do you want to pick that first?
I love your comments from this morning. Well, first of all, what we learned at Walmart. When I reported into the vice chairman and he was a non-digital person, it was hard. When then I reported into another vice chairman who was young and vibrant and very into digital, it became much easier. So one, you got to find, and I think someone said that earlier, you got to find who your champion is. Yeah. And secondly, you got to find out where there's a problem. If you're in charge of innovation and you walk around waxing philosophical about innovation, you very quickly got to find where there's heat for a problem, and you've got to work on that problem. I think it's death when you have these. In Frito-Lay, we had an innovation group that was ineffective at one point because they didn't understand what they were there to do. They're just looking at research, looking at trends, trying to understand mega trends. Find 5 problems that are big and hairy and can really affect the industry, and then find a champion behind it.
I mean, great point, actually. In fact, I hate this word, you know, I'm an innovation group. How pompous is that? Can you imagine going to a business and saying, I'm kind of an innovation group, I'm here to kind of, you know, innovate for you or something.
I'm smarter than you.
Go away, yeah. So it's much better to actually, this is exactly what happened to me. Our CEO came in with a blank sheet of paper saying bring, but he didn't say innovation, he said bring digital technologies, and he was brutal about the word adoption. So the first 2-3 years that I worked with him on this thing, all conversations were about, okay, I accept the fact that you can do the scanning and all of that good stuff. Tell me what got adopted. So the entire conversation with him was, and I can tell you that in the first 3 years, if he had not had clear successes, he would have got rid of the group, and rightly so. So I would say, don't even worry about how big a problem it is, just find some problem and solve it. Just start somewhere. And yesterday, I think we heard from several of these speakers that said, just start somewhere and start doing it. You don't have a game plan or something, just get your hands dirty. And good things happen once you start delivering.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think I think if you just have the friend and the CEO, you're scaring other people. So you know this. You've got to find friends around the organization. So rather than coming up with the fear tactic of like, hey, if we don't change, here's this brink, here's this cliff we're going over. Sometimes it helps to just go in and kind of help some of the business heads that are already struggling with stuff. And it's kind of a suck-up move, no question about it. But to your antibodies comment, you're a little threatening. So finding a short-term problem versus the innovation mantra, which is more long-term, might help you get the clout, and then it's having a bunch of friends that are actually saying, hey, this guy's doing good work, and not having a staff is really your comment. I think it's actually a good thing, because most people come in, they want to, well, I need to get 3 people, I need to do this, I need to do that. It's like, yeah, but they're already doing that, so your role, I think, as a whatever we're going to call it, if we're going to trash the word innovation, I'm all game. But yeah, as the guru, another bad word, yeah, you've got to show them you're a free agent, but also a team player. It is a tough job. And when I was doing that at Anixter, I mean, I was the only one in the company in charge of startups. Everyone hated me. They're like, how'd you get this great job? You're some shithead from FedEx. You don't even know our business. And it's like, oh no. So I hit a lot and actually moved one of the companies we started. I moved it to Denver as quick as I could, only selfishly because it was right next door to TCI, the largest cable company in the world that was writing our checks. So sometimes it's good to get away, but not until you get enough inertia and mojo, because you're just putting it somewhere else to protect it from the corporation.
I'd say show them that the competition's doing it. That was the fastest way we ever got any change created, was to say, if Kellogg's doing something, then it was demanded that I would do it by tomorrow.
I think one of the lessons from Daru as well is the concept of low-hanging fruit. You know, he started off small, get successes, get a reputation, and then the business pulls you into them. And I think we so often forget that. Dan and then Gil. Yeah.
Do you have a story of some failures of working with startups? So you met them, you thought, let's do this, it could be interesting, it could be helpful, got involved, and then it just went to hell. I'd love to hear what led to that, why.
Who wants to pick up a failure? Carter, you look like you're
I mean, I'll just give you a very quick. At Walmart, the problem is the scale will kill them. So we've had a lot of failures on overly optimistic startups who thought they could handle our volume in whatever form you want to take. Digital, the size of the pipe, the number of transactions we're pushing through, the number of customer interactions they're going to have to deal with. And we routinely broke startups. So our challenge was understanding in a pilot environment for them to understand scalability and where the governors were on scalability. So we had a lot of failures.
I'll build on. Oh, go ahead.
The key is, by the way, in our team, we have a phrase that says failure is always an option. In fact, you can't do this kind of stuff if you're afraid of failing. But the key is to fail quickly if you're going to fail often, so you don't kind of get wedded to something before you go too far in. So yeah, and there are many reasons for failure. It may be that the technology and everything works great, but the price point just doesn't work out. Or in some cases, everything is great, but the business kind of moves on, is not interested. We're just discussing, in some cases, we had a great solution to a business that got sold. So that's happened many times.
Gail, yeah.
Oh, mine was also related to scale, which is just the scalability of technology. So early on, broadband, it worked. It worked most of the time, but it wasn't really scalable to copy testing because it had to work all the time. And consumers weren't going to, if it didn't work, then we were in really deep trouble.
Okay. Yeah, Gil. Yeah.
So going back to the staffing question, when you do have buy-in and budget, how do you recruit internally? What kind of, do you recruit internally? Do you go outside? I mean, I've heard of combinations. So what, I'm thinking more for the for example, how do you find the talent, especially when the non-20-somethings have been working in the corporations and say, you know what, this is never going to work. I'm never, it's a political nightmare. How do you find that talent? How do you incentivize it?
So it's a good question. We try to balance in-house people with outside. So typically what we have found in a group of about 15, I deliberately try and get two-ish kind of moves every year. That's kind of the right teams. More than two, that's too much disruption. Otherwise, and most of them don't go away. They go to other parts of the business. So we've kind of seeded a number of people from my team into the businesses, and they're good friends of the team out there. We try and balance outside and inside because it brings fresh ideas. Otherwise, you kind of get company think going all the way around. But generally, these people are, we are very, very selective. As I said, we hire two, and we take a long, long time, look at lots of candidates before we pick. We are kind of in a good position where there's a lot of demand for people to kind of join the team. It's kind of a cool place to be, in a sense, good brand. Yeah. So we can be quite selective. And we go through a very rigorous process where every single member of the team interviews every new candidate. And then we collectively put the thoughts together, and the team makes a decision on who is acceptable or not. Because it's a pool of people who work together without a lot of rules. and the chemistry has to be right as well. So it's a very deliberate process we go through.
If your question's like a new team, I usually would do three things. One, a super sharp kid from one of your competitors, someone from another industry that's tangentially something you're interested in, but in this case, probably a really good digital media person, if that's kind of the way you were going, or a scientist from something, but someone just totally unrelated to your industry, but that really kind of gets the mission. And then somebody in your company that really has some passion around it, because you have to have an insider in there. So hopefully you kind of mix it. If you just bring in insiders, it's the good people usually go, "Ooh, I'm not stupid. This is going to be gone in a year." So you got to bring in some new blood and protect them. You know, the serve and protect. You know, the police car blowing up. It just happens. I mean, these things get shut down, and the next guy's in there, and they're like, "Who hired all these people? Well, why do we own that company?" And then so you do it again. You're starting all over again.
Other questions? Yeah.
My experience has been in life science lab. Short term is 5 years. So in that space, particularly on the corporate side, one of the problems we had was turnover of people dealing with a startup. So like roughly about every 18 months, whoever was responsible for this changed. So after a while, startup had the same people, and they had a tribal knowledge.
Yeah.
And on our side, we had people that know really anything, and it was a very difficult thing to keep, like, negotiated, because there's an ongoing negotiation. So, like, have you encountered that, and, like, what's your thinking about how to deal with that?
So just for everybody, the question was really about, as startups who have much more consistency in their people, build this tribal knowledge up about your business on the big company side, and you keep changing in the big company, and suddenly you're just seeing all new peoples. How do you kind of reconcile that? Because sometimes these dances go on for months, if not years sometimes. So any thoughts on that?
I'll just make one comment, and I don't understand life sciences, but technical documentation is often ignored, and it's really important. If you're getting a revolving door, or you have somebody who has a lot of expertise and they keep it in their head to maintain power and make sure they have job security, and this was a struggle for us when we were in the go-go years of around mid-2000s, when the Valley was heating up again, was documenting processes, documenting software, documenting so when you lose people, you maintain the intellectual capital.
I think it comes down to this photo that I've been boring you with for 20 minutes. It's like take someone from the startup, because this is a long-term commitment that you're doing. So take someone from the startup and embed them in your company, someone from your company actually embed them in the startup. It's a tough sale, but you can do it. Amway's even done this with a couple of little companies that they own, and kind of get that connectivity going. And then just like any good board has a succession plan for their CEOs with that venture, if it's that important, and it's a 5-year cycle, which it could be technology, it doesn't have to be biotech or life sciences. You need to have a little succession plan, so there are other people besides documentation that are really kind of tangentially at least close to the venture. So if someone does leave, because in this environment the good ones are leaving, there's other places to go that you've got some backfill. But I think that intermingling is actually a better move if you can pull it off. Might have regulatory issues if you're going to trials and things, but
Gentleman there, and then Steve.
I want to applaud Northwestern for having this panel discussion, having worked in investment banking for 18 years and spent a number of years in Silicon Valley. I went back and got a PhD. It was on asymmetric relationships between large companies and small companies.
wow.
By the way, Robert Valley from University of Illinois, who was an investment banker for many years, and you might notice an article in your folder called "Making Asymmetric Partnerships Work." He's the Robert Valley author.
Oh, cool.
of that article. So
Welcome, Robert.
Good article.
But I think one of the things about going into growing businesses, we have, as an entrepreneur, we probably have 3 typical ways to market. One is to build it organically, which is a long gestation period for technology companies. The second is to buy up the market. Dean, I applaud you. You put down the roll-up strategy about buying up the competitors.
Yeah, Robert asked me not to use my build, buy, borrow slide because he's getting tired of it, but you're spot on.
And then the third way, which is almost de facto today, is to start collaborating with the company. And like marriages, the failure rate is over 60%. So I try to tell entrepreneurs, and I try to think of this, but I've run the hard way, and that is go into the relationship looking to build your own investment
It may not be directly a direct answer, but the strategy that we really employ is co-creating solutions. So we start out with the company doing validation on the platform. So we started out doing internet validations a couple of years before we chose the partners. In social media, we experimented with 200 different companies and tried to figure out, those are panels, and then chose about 50 that we wanted to kind of focus on. And I think that experience of co-creating, it's really a lot what Rob was saying yesterday about taking options out or placing bets. I like to think strategically about placing bets and holding bets. And holding a bet is something that you know, all right, this is going to go somewhere, and that seems to be a really good way to communicate with senior management, which is what I spent my career working on, is how do I sell my ideas in every single time to senior management, how to communicate what we want to do, because there's a lot of risk. When you walk in, they think, all right, you are going to be taking on unmitigated risk, and so it's just pulling that a little bit off to the side so they can see, no, if we don't do this, we're going to be behind.
Actually, Gary, you mentioned a key word there, co-creation, which is kind of a new emerging word, but it's also a function of big companies, and we talked with Coca-Cola, General Electric, DuPont, are all companies that are deliberately going after co-creation, which is a much more deliberate strategy to embrace people outside the four walls of their company early, when they've just got ideas on a piece of paper, and co-create solutions with startups, vendors, customers and other people, and they create physical places to do that. So DuPont started, for example, 2 of these in East Asia just as pilots under the radar, raging success, new products their scientists couldn't figure out were invented in rapid fashion, and the lawyers don't get involved later. And now they have 15 of these co-creation centers throughout Asia, and they're starting to build them in the United States. And I think General Mills calls them experimentation hubs. So people like Coca-Cola, General Electric, all these companies are realizing they can't do it on their own, but they have to create a much more systematic way to embrace the outside world. So I think...
Yeah, I think if I understood your question right, I mean, there's like getting startups commercially graded, available, ready to take funding and be big. But in terms of partnering, I think we can learn a lesson from TFA and what Howard was saying yesterday, which is, they're grooming those kids to be ready when they walk in to just take the reins. They know the tools, they know the drill, a little bit different dance. And what is missing is actually, it's pretty easy for corporations to understand, okay, tell me how to deal with startups, but startups usually don't get coached to say, here's what you're going to expect. There's going to be this curve, there's going to be some fatigue, you're going to get sick of these people, but this is the mission, this is the role, here's the best way to get successful. So just a little coaching helps, I think, there. And another lesson is here. At 1871, when you go on the tour here at lunch, you can come here as a mom, as a entrepreneur that you're really not one, you just think you are. You can show up, say, I want to start a new company. Somehow you get through the vetting process, you buy a desk, and then you say, okay, I have this great idea. It's a food app. God help us, we don't need another one, but it's, and I don't know how to code. So they have Code Academy here, which has just been rebranded. So you can learn how to code, you can get the thing started, you've got an ecosystem, and eventually if you get the thing going, we can get you funded and get you out the door. So kind of taking those 2 lessons and helping startups to say, okay, now you've signed the deal, how are you going to survive this thing for 6 months, let alone 5 years on a life science project? I think it's important to be blunt about there's a lot of pitfalls, and let's learn from our mistakes.
Absolutely. Other questions, thoughts? Stephen.
Yeah, I have a question around kind of a value sharing between the large company and the small company, where the small company has enabling technology and aspires to be big, but needs large company partners to get to market. And the large company wants to own all the IP and sequester the small company as a satellite. How do you dance around the value share question, whether it's IP or margin sharing or whatever?
It's called a good contract.
Yeah, Daru.
Well, it's a great question, actually, because the early days we didn't pay attention to it, and it gets 100 times more difficult once something is successful. Nobody wants to give up. So we learned a long time ago that you start those discussions on day one. And within the company, we have a very, very specific discussion with the business when we are embarking on this, in terms of, is the output of this something where we want, it's a competitive advantage and we want to keep the IP, or in many cases, actually, we want to be deliberate and help the company succeed in spreading it to as many different places. So the safety solutions or things of that sort, or operational efficiency. Actually, we want the company to kind of spread it to lots of places and be successful. In return, we get kind of a better price point going in. So we're absolutely clear going in at the earliest stage what position the company is on IP. On the cement thing, as I said, it's very clear that some of those things are quite, could be competitive advantage. So they got lawyers all over in terms of one-way NDAs, two-way. I mean, it takes forever. But it's best to do that very clearly up front rather than after the fact, because then it gets to be really messy. But be clear what your objective is. Is the solution actually great, where you want to create a solution that lots of people in the industry use? The Wave Glider, we actually wanted to create an industry where now the company, we took them from whale watching to a major part of oil and gas. They were acquired, part of them acquired by Schlumberger. And so it was a great exit. We love it because the price point is going to come down.
Yeah.
We actually flipped it over and sold IP for commoditized solutions that in order to spread the technology throughout the industry, and then we were able to focus more on co-creating new solutions. So we basically said, all right, that's going to be a base subscription. And so that was a really good discipline for us to figure out, all right, where are the things that are going to be proprietary to the industry and proprietary for us to be creating, and where can we literally as a corporation monetize some of what the solutions are that we've come up with.
That's a good point. And it's an amazing question, because this is where they fail. This is the number one reason these partnerships fail. So I think everyone has to grow up and be honest. Do you want this to be an arms dealer relationship where you're enabling a startup, whether or not you're giving them money, or do you want it to be proprietary to you as a kernel part of your new Cisco router system? And you have to be big boys about it and decide, okay, are we doing a controlling transaction here, or am I just helping you along? And I'm okay for you to be an arms dealer, because I'm going to make money on your company or whatever. I'm not worried about it as a competitive position. So, market research company getting them going, you might want to keep it proprietary, but it's going to get out there eventually. Whereas a kernel part of a technology, I think the protectionist discussion should happen early, and be honest about it and see if you can get a deal around it. Otherwise, you'll be fighting in 6 months and wasted another year.
I'd like to pose a question to the panel. Another dimension of that, which is, and I had this happen to me as a startup CEO, was the battle we have is, you come with your beta product and the client goes, well, I'd like these 10 features. Those 10 features are specific to them, and you go, no, I'm trying to build a product for the market, not for you specifically. And you bash heads and they go, well, I'm only going to invest in your product if you do these features, and you can't see any market need. So have you guys got any sort of to share how you can navigate that? So it's kind of another dimension I think startups really wrestle with. Am I building a product for you or the market?
Great question.
Sorry, Peter.
Yeah.
The third component of our relationship was that I would go out and actually sponsor these solutions to the industry. Yeah. And so I think that asking them to add all the bells and whistles, but then say for certain choices, you can market them to the industry and I'll help you market them. I always felt that was a bit of my obligation for having them invest and create the technology solution for us. Okay. And then again, we were super clear about which ones are going to be proprietary and which ones are just our bread and butter.
Okay, nice.
I think it helps if you're, let's say you're a company and you're building a web-based platform for a bunch of retailers to sit on. It helps to come with consumer information to show the value, consumer value in certain features or functionality. So we would all argue about wanting certain customized aspects for our platform. But if they could say, these are the things consumers hold most dearly, and we can prove this. So we want to develop to help all of you this set of functionality. It helps if there can be some rigor around their argument, and that's because we saw this all the time whenever you go on a third-party platform and you all want different personalized, customized aspects. And if they say, look, we got all of this, you'll benefit if we do these 3 things, and here's the data to show it.
Okay. I think that's critical. As a startup, you should be showing that. And your question is also about bracket creep, because the reason you want to use these guys is to be nimble and quick, and you've just slowed them down. Yeah. You gave them the 12 features that you couldn't build yourself, and it's going to as fast as we say we are in startups, it's going to take a while to build that. So you got to be honest and open about it. But I love the data comments like, here's what we learned, guys. Yeah. This is why you shouldn't do that.
Yeah. It's the power of your idea and the power of your belief. You got to drive that through the big corporate, which is what we talked about yesterday. Cool. Stephen, another one. Yeah, follow on.
Just offer an observation. Those are very insightful answers. I appreciate them. I've been on both sides of the equation. I'm on the small company side now. One of the biggest problems with dancing with the elephants is that most of the elephants own it all, and you're our lawyer. And that's that. And so if there's an insight to the big companies is get wise about how you do value discussions, because you kill the little guy right away.
This is the best comment. We were terrible at doing this at PepsiCo when I was there a long time ago. PepsiCo for 12 years and Walmart, we did exactly what you said.
I did the mouse under the elephant's foot.
Yeah. Was the foot still lifted, or we? Yeah.
That's why I had trouble answering your question, because we did it wrong so often, because we didn't know how to cooperate and didn't know how to let them breathe and develop. We just wanted to get them under our thumb as quickly as possible.
I think you're right. We're being way too polite up here. You're absolutely right. It's sorry, but it's true. You need to be tough. And you need to go. You need to just say, hey, we're big, fat, and slow. There's a reason we're doing this. But if you really want to do that, write me the right check, and you can have it all. And I'm not sure if my people stick around, but so there's a dance there.
Yeah, we've got time for a couple more questions. So Kathy at the back, yep.
Yay. Well said.
Sure. Yeah. Robert.
But at least they're talking.
You
Come
get
on.
one date at least. Robert. Yeah.
This also is, now that I'm in academia, I'll just call the last bastion of the Soviet system. A huge issue with big universities trying to own too much of the IP in our internet and say, well, I'm not going to share this with the university. And I think places like Northwestern has got, I know Cambridge University, they've gotten to the point where we don't really care about making money here. I think we care about getting, or we want to say we care about getting commercialization out there, advancing our innovation.
Yep.
It's not about the money. The other part of it is fear. It is that the next Netscape or Mosaic that comes from Illinois, is going to be something that Illinois gets recognized for instead of, it gets lost in the shuffle. So you don't want a lot of these innovations getting out that you just blew because you were too uptight about making a lot of money on them.
Yeah. Thank you, Robert. Time for one more question. Yes, sir, in the middle there.
I guess with all of that, I wonder, just from my experience, it's been a question that we've struggled with. How do you arrive at your definition of success? Right? So we're talking about IP, we're talking about strategic value, we're talking about economic value. And at what point in the partnership or the project do you set that? Or does it keep moving?
In my case, it's pretty simple. Adoption.
Yeah.
It gets adopted, it's successful, at least from our standpoint. So it's very, very simple and clear.
That would be what I would define as actually a point of failure as I kind of look back on it, honestly. We definitely did adoption. We shifted 85% of our research to the internet in 1 year. That was adoption. That was change management. As I looked back, though, over the course of my career, because I've had a little bit of a chance to do that, we saved $50 million for the corporation. And what I should have done is gone in and measured it and quantified it. And not just for percent savings, but for the actual, resources that we were creating, and especially in a corporation. So if you're working with corporations, help anybody that's like I was with a non-working budget, because corporations separate out, of course, working dollars and non-working dollars. And so if you're able to get savings off of non-working dollars, that has really significant value, and it can really help them make a difference.
Can you explain for everybody what a non-working dollar is?
So non-working dollars are expenses. So they're like market research and service, any of the service things that happen in the organization. And working dollars are advertising, promotion, things that actually tie closer to the bottom line, and money that you spend that lines itself up into the P&L.
Thanks, Carter.
Matthew, just one aspect of your question. It's got to work for both the small company and the big company. That's the thing. We broke the backs on a payment processing partner. I mean, I could go on and on. We broke the backs because we negotiated too hard. They weren't healthy. Then they couldn't thrive, grow, invest in R&D, further develop their company to be able to help us. So, if that asymmetrical relationship means that you're cramming something down their throat, it's not going to be valuable for you because they aren't going to grow and be able to be successful. So we made that mistake way too many times, negotiating so hard that we actually hurt the company. Though we wanted to be healthy.
Yeah.
God, thank you, Dean.
I think it's three things: it's alpha, beta, revenue, or in his case, adoption. But you got to remember, big, fat, and slow guys. We're like, why are you doing this in the first place? It's not just the great ideas, and we get to go to cool places. It's need for speed. So if there's one group that you can push on timing and release dates, it's startups. They'll work their asses off. They'll go much faster than you can possibly do it. Maybe because they just have the domain expertise, not to say your people are bad. So just don't forget, you've got a throttle there you can use. You can put your foot on the gas, and you've got to incent them for that. So to me, sometimes it's just speed, but there's milestones to answer your question, and they do move. You got to be realistic, but you got to know you're on the right track and make sure somebody above is supporting it.
Yeah. So this has been a great panel. I mean, we've heard from Carter about the integration dance, about how you get these things to happen inside big companies. Gail, I loved your kind of nomenclature of the mind gap. And I think importantly, we've heard across different areas, but the corporate sponsor inside, in your case, the treasurer, very important person. So people listen to the money guys in companies up and down. It's very interesting. I think, with Dean, an interesting framework about different ways that companies can grow and interact with startups. And there's no silver bullet. Each company has to find its own way that's consistent with its culture, what it's trying to achieve. And with Daru, just the way of, building ecosystems to solve specific problems. Start small, get your reputation going, and eventually the business will pull you in. And I'd like to finish with my own personal success story of all this, because I started off with a bad story with IBM. I was CEO of a pre-revenue company. We found a non-early adopter company called Norwich Union Insurance, a 250-year-old insurance company with a highly early adopter, 39-year-old CIO, Alex Robinson. And we did the dance with them, where they paid us consulting to start figuring out the final part of our beta product. And to this day, I fondly remember the day that he and I sat and met at the restaurant at the Hilton at London Heathrow Airport. At 8 in the morning, we both flew in and we signed a $30 million software deal and had a glass of champagne. Again, that's a good story. So we did a dance for 2 years with Norwich Union before we signed that deal. And they did it as a license deal because they said, we probably should do this as an investment, as an equity, but God, that's so hard in the company. But I can do 30 million through OpEx, today. So these things can work, they can be successful, and I think we've had a lot of good positive approaches today. So please join me in thanking the panel. And Rob, lead us to lunch.
Thanks. So Peter, thank you to Peter as well.
And I'm still thinking why he's wearing dark glasses. He kept throwing me off. I'm looking at this.